These days, there's a lot of panic about changing rooms at public pools and gyms. Who can or who can't, who should or shouldn't be in them. Now don't worry, I'm not here to get all political. I'm not going to offer a take on that. I'm just bringing it up so you can understand why I always kind of laugh when it gets mentioned, because it reminds me of something that happened to me in a dressing room where all rules, regulations, expectations, and social norms went straight out the window. And I thought that it was pretty freaking scary at the time, so I wanted to share it. I've been going to the pool religiously 3 times a week as part of a post-pandemic Get Fit Again campaign, and it's actually working. I was really proud of myself. I was sticking to my fitness regime, diet was going well, blah blah blah. And I should probably add now that I'm a female, and so this took place in the female changing room at the pool/gym complex I'm still a member of to this day. Me and some of my other friends were in the changing rooms getting ready for a swim session. We'd started getting to know each other from seeing each other at the gym, so we'd begun timing our swim and workout sessions to spot and pace one another. There were 4 of us there that day, plus an elderly woman that I hadn't seen before. You know that kind of sound that lets you know that something bad is coming, but you can't quite describe it? Well, we all heard that, just the sounds of a scuffle coming from somewhere outside the dressing rooms. Loud bangs, indecipherable shouts, just general chaos. I guess we all looked at each other, frozen mid-change. My eyes shot to the hallway that led around the corner from the dressing room, and I think everyone else looked that way too. A man came thundering into the changing rooms, and I'll never forget the sight of him. He was dressed in filthy little blue shorts, almost comically short. He wore a white sleeveless t-shirt, also filthy and covered in stains. Then, at the ends of his wiry legs were these huge brown boots that smashed against the tiles as he ran. His hair was wild and disheveled, like it had been ripped out in clumps. And it's not like I got a great look at the guy, but it was obvious that he was sick in some fundamental way. His skin was blotchy and flaky. He had cuts and bruises all over him, and his eyes were absolutely crazed as he burst in. And I swear to God, there were flecks of foam at the corners of his mouth. That wasn't even the really scary part, nor the fact that he just burst into the women's locker room. The really scary part was that he was holding a massive, wicked-looking machete that appeared rusted and probably infected with tetanus. It didn't even look that sharp. It was absolutely freaking terrible when you're in the middle of changing in your bathing suit for a swim. He paused for a second when he saw us and let out a sort of horrifying grunt scream, a guttural animal roar, like a beast. The machete seemed to quiver in his sweaty palms, and then he began running right at me. I want to say that I was super brave and clotheslined the machete-wielding maniac, but no. I screamed at the top of my lungs and fell back against the lockers. He came charging through and was followed almost immediately by a gang of armed cops chasing him, yelling for him to freeze. I barely had time to think, let alone react, but looking back now, I'm extremely glad that the man didn't think to grab one of us as a hostage. Instead, he thundered through the dressing room, into the showers, and out into the pool area, out of sight, and those cops chased after him. As he ran, he shoved the elderly woman towards the cops, sending her face first into one of them, who caught her, steadied her, and then sprinted off to rejoin the pursuit. We all stood there, terrified and completely shell-shocked. Screams suddenly erupted from the pool area where people had already been swimming, and then more yelling, and then a gunshot. We just stared at each other, sort of like, what the flip just happened? Did that really just occur? The elderly woman was crying and shaking, so we went to check if she was okay, and thankfully she was, just kind of shaken up. We didn't have to wait long to find out what had happened. None of us wanted to leave the dressing room, and who knew what was still going on out there? Even though the noise from the pool area had died down, it was still pretty tense. Thankfully, a cop came to get us shortly after and informed us it was safe to come out. None of us really felt like swimming anymore, so we'd already dressed again and exited the gym instead of heading to the pool. As we followed the cop to the front desk, I saw a machete man, now without his machete I assume, being roughly escorted into a cop car. Turns out, he'd been strolling down the street in broad daylight, threatening people with that machete. The cops had been called and he ran, right into the gym, and then into our locker room. It was never clear if he actually intended to use the machete on anyone, and I'm immensely grateful no one was hurt, not even the elderly lady that he shoved. She never came back to that gym, though. I really can't blame her, to be honest. And thankfully, no one was injured when the cop's gun went off during the pursuit. As As a responsible gun owner in an open carry state, I've been extra paranoid since then about triple checking that my safety is on. Then again, I won't go anywhere without the damn thing now because you never know who's gonna come bursting in wielding a huge blade at any time. As for the guy, they think that he was probably on bath salts or something, which honestly checks out. Thankfully, the whole thing didn't leave any lasting scars. It's become the stuff of legends at my gym, and those of us who were there that day still get first dibs on workout gear and are treated like celebrities. The perks of being attacked with a machete, I guess. I'm pretty sure the guy went to jail, but I don't think he's there anymore. The reason I'm writing this is because I think he's out, and I'll never forget the face of the madman who burst into the locker room, not as long as I live. So unless he has a twin brother, he's been released because the other day, even though he looked much healthier and cleaner, I saw an identical-looking man mopping the floor at Wendy's. I think I'm older than your average listener. I'm 61 and this happened when I was 12 and Clarky was 11. I'm also English, as in from England, so I'm sorry in advance for anything that entails. I'm weirdly nervous about writing this up, and I guess you don't need to know this, but I'll stress that this event has haunted me my whole life, and if I think about this too long, I actually start feeling sick, and I think it'll be pretty understandable why. I met Clarky when I was in primary school. We met in the infants, our first year at a small suburban primary school, and became fast friends on day one. From that day on, after I first found him playing with action figures on the playmat in the corner, we were inseparable. He was my best friend and I was his. We had other friends too. We were just normal regular kids who became part of the normal regular lads at primary school. In fact, if you'd asked me back then, I would have said that we were the popular kids, at least out of the boys. Always up to something, always getting into some kind of trouble or other. Nothing serious though, and adults tended to love us quite a lot, just as much as the other kids wanted to be our friends. I was always more of the leader and Clarky was more of a follower, but the relationship felt equal. We were partners in crime, and when it came time for us to move on to big school in the town, neither of us really had any reservations. Christ on a cracker, what naive little lads we were, though. If you don't know, the school system works a bit differently in the UK. We don't have middle school, just primary straight into secondary. This means that when you're 11, you suddenly shift to a much bigger, much more crowded school with other students as old as 16 or 18, depending on the school. All of a sudden, we'd gone from being kings of our little primary school to being tiny little squirts surrounded by hulking, terrifying monsters. We were not prepared, man. Just absolutely, completely out of our depth. We strolled up that driveway like kings, and with the passage of just one single day, came crawling back out no more than broken, quivering wrecks. It's a huge crash down to earth to make the shift from primary to secondary, and to this day, I insist it's actively damaging for kids to have such a sudden, extreme transition. Clarky and I had simply assumed that all the kids from our primary school would be put in the same classes together, but they actually do the opposite. They spread students around to try and encourage them to make new friends, which just feels kind of cruel to me. In mine and Clarky's case, we were not only in separate houses, similar to a U.S. homeroom, but the 6 houses in our school were split into 2, so only students from 3 houses had classes together. Clarky was in blue and I was in red, which meant that we didn't even have a single class together. Thankfully, we still got to see each other at break and lunch, but damn, it was rough. And on top of that, we suddenly became deeply, painfully unpopular. I could speculate a million reasons why, but ultimately it doesn't matter. Both of us were severely struggling to make friends, and we wouldn't even stick to each other because we spent most of our days totally separate. Sure, we still hung out after school every day and on the weekends, but it just wasn't the same. It actually hurt. When you're a lonely, unpopular kid, you seem to become a beacon for even more trouble, and as such, Clarky and I became the targets of bullies. One group from my half of the year bullied me, one from Clark's bullied him, and usually never the twain did meet. These little arseholes aren't even important. I don't even remember who they were, and I'm sure that they grew up to become decent enough blokes. They weren't just some year 7s who made our year 7 miserable. They weren't the cocks, though. And that's what Clarky and I called the group of year 9 boys, but only behind their backs when we were in the safety of my house or Clarky's. In school, we didn't call them anything. We didn't even make eye contact. Jake was a big lumbering oaf who looked like he'd be a dumb arse, but was weirdly creative in his scathing insults. Jonah was completely unremarkable in every way except he had this cruel twinkle in his eye. Jonah had a tongue that could dish out insults which hurt as much as any punch, and they would do both. They would insult and punch us. Those two, and a rotating group of other faceless friends they had. The sidekicks would change, but Jake and Jonah remained a constant threat. Always there, always needling, always kicking the backs of our shoes or pouring glue in an unattended school bag or cutting a necktie. If we were shoved on the stairs, you could be sure that Jake and Jonah were nearby smiling malevolently at us. If someone threw a bottle at me, I could guarantee they'd be close by. Every fist, every jab, everything that really truly hurt, it all seemed to come from these two. It didn't matter whether Clarky and I were together or apart. They always seemed to find us multiple times each day and dish out some cruel and unusual form of punishment. I'm not sure they ever explained what we'd done to offend them so much. It was just an established, known thing that our existence disgusted them and we would suffer for it. You know what bullies can be like, I guess. You've read enough stories about this vile, cowardly lot. But let me tell you, they were way worse in the past. And we hated school. Our first term there, from September through Christmas, was hell. Then the spring term was no better. Worse, in fact. How our parents didn't notice anything, I'll never know. It used to drive me mad how nobody would just notice the bags under our eyes, or how we'd become quiet and withdrawn and ask us what was wrong. Why did I never consider just telling them something was up in the first place? You just didn't tell people back then. Dobbing someone in would lead to a fate worse than death. Even people who still liked you would hate you if you dobbed someone in, even a bully, or so I thought. Absolutely stupid looking back. Anybody who'd behave like that wouldn't be worth caring about in the first place, but I guess it's easy to think with adult logic when you're an adult. Then the summer term came and we're introduced to something that we'd never even considered. The school pool. We knew we had a school pool, of course. It was a big building just separate from the main school, but it always seemed like something the other kids got to do and not us. Then, in summer term of year 7, we saw swimming on our lesson plan photocopies, and there was much rejoicing in my form room. I didn't particularly care either way because I was so depressed in general because of the bullying, but that changed when I dragged myself to swimming class and found Clarky waiting there in queue outside the changing rooms. It turned out that our summer PE lessons were split by gender, so boys could do swimming while girls did netball, and then girls did swimming later in the week while boys did cricket. I hated cricket, but that's not the point. Swimming was fun, and it meant that I actually got to spend some time with Clarky in classes. It was about 5 swimming lessons in. We had our swimming lessons on Monday, and it was the last class of the day before home time. Clarky and I lingered in the changing rooms, waiting for everyone else to leave before we showered and changed, because when you're a bullying victim, you soon learn not to do anything in front of others that could leave you vulnerable. In those days, there really wasn't much in the way of health and safety, so our PE teacher had gone off somewhere, probably hurrying for his cigarettes and coffee. He'd even given us the keys to the changing room and asked us to lock up when we were done. And for all the bullying, adults still liked us, I guess. Man, Clarky said, swimming is fun. And we were still in our swimming trunks. We could go back in, I joked. Clarky's eyes lit up. Let's do it. And I was surprised and a little thrilled to see that old spark of life back in my friend, which is why I didn't think twice about just running back into the pool area and jumping in. I didn't really consider how much trouble we could get in for playing in the pool unsupervised. It hadn't really been drummed into us how dangerous it was, which I guess was a systematic failing in itself. But as long as we kept out of the deep end, it wasn't like we could get in much trouble playing in water, right? Barking laughs echoed around the pool room, and I surfaced to see Jonah and Jake strolling in from the changing rooms. They were fully dressed in their school uniforms, shoes on and everything. Why were they even here, though? Even in the warm water, I felt my skin go icy cold and goose-pimpled. Clarky whispered something to me in alarm. Well, 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 if it isn't the little idiots, I remember Jonah saying. That's what he called us. Maybe they weren't as creative as I give them credit for looking back, but that's what they said. Oh, crap, I whispered. We were in the center of the pool, far from any of the exit ladders, and even if we did get out on the other side, Jonah and Jake were in front of the exit to the changing room. What's that idiot one? Jake asked. Come here, Jonah said. Neither Clarky nor I moved. Jonah clapped suddenly and lunged forward like he was about to jump into the pool. He yelled again at us, telling us to come here. We're not going to hurt you, Jake said. Yeah, Jonah added. We think it's neat that you broke in here. Maybe you're sound. Sound as pound, Jake echoed. And we had to swim over there. What choice do we have at that point? If you ever went into a swimming pool in Britain in the 70s or 80s, you'll know that some of them had these drainage holes along the sides, covered by a metal or plastic grate. In some pools, I'd been in before or since they were bolted down. In others, they were loose. At our school pool, they were supposed to be bolted down, but I guess this one had come loose because Jonah now lifted it up. "Dare you to stick your head in the hole?" he said, and the water lapped over the gap in the tiles, and I just shook my head. "Come on, boys," Jake said. "Be cool. We'll be nice to you if you do it." And I shook my head again. To this day, I have no idea why Clarky did it. Really, what could they have done to us? Did he genuinely believe our worst tormentors would suddenly stop bullying us and become our friends if he stuck his head in that hole? Maybe he simply didn't consider that his head might actually fit. Clarky was very, very small, even for our age, and I was over a head taller than him. He was a really small boy. "What's down there?" Jake jeered. "Take a look." And Clarky surfaced. "How?" "Just put your head in and look over the edge," Jake said. Clarky leaned forward again into the hole, and he let his body float up so his face angled down. Quickly, Jonah shoved the grate down, pushing Clarky's head further into the hole. Clarky began to flounder and splash, trying to twist and turn to surface to get some air, and I swam beside him, yelling, "Let him out." Jonah stood with his foot on the grate, head thrown back, laughing like some supervillain. Clarky flailed and splashed and was starting to panic, and, Christ, how did Jonah not see what could happen? I don't think he meant for it to happen. Well, I know he didn't, but still, it did. Clarky struggled hard, jerked and twisted in the water, and suddenly we heard a muted yet clearly audible, clearly awful cracking sound. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard. Almost immediately, Clarky stopped moving entirely. His body started to drift down, and his head still caught in the grate, the angle almost impossible. Jake noticed before Jonah did. Jonah was still standing there, pinning Clarky in place, and Jake tugged his sleeve and gestured to Clarky. Jonah went immediately still and suddenly white. It was like immediate shock had hit him, and I could see him starting to shake. He stared at me, dead in the eyes. "Please don't tell anyone," he said, and he looked like he was about to cry, and then he and Jake ran off. Please don't tell anyone. No threats, no rage, just him begging me not to tell. I ripped the grate off and pulled Clarky free, but of course, it was too late. His neck rolled limply on his shoulders, and the angle had somehow led to him breaking his own neck as he tried to free himself. I thought Jonah and Jake had simply run away, and I was shaking myself, crying, cradling Clarky in my arms, trying to work out what the hell I was going to do. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait long because they returned, the PE teacher and another teacher in tow, and they'd gone to get help at least. There was no opportunity for Jonah and Jake to pretend they weren't there or weren't involved. They'd clearly known to go and get a teacher, which made it obvious they knew something. In the aftermath, my dilemma was whether I should tell anyone that Jonah had essentially killed Clarky, my best friend. In the end, I went along with the story that we'd all been screwing around in the pool, and Clarky had stuck his head in the grate for a dare and got stuck and hurt himself. I didn't say Jonah had been standing on the grate at the time. Maybe this was the wrong thing, but I do genuinely believe Jonah was remorseful, and it would have ruined his life if I'd spoken up. Maybe he'd have deserved it. As it was, I don't think anyone really believed my story anyway. Instead, they just thought all three of us had killed Clarky. His parents could never look at me or speak to me again. My own parents could hardly look at me for a while, although they never directly suggested they thought that I was to blame for anything. The bullying did stop, though, going forward. Not just from Jake and Jonah, but everyone. In fact, more than once I saw a few kids look at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I'm not sure if this was because they thought I'd snap someone's neck or because Jonah and Jake threatened anyone away from giving me crap. Either way, it's nearly 50 years later. God, I'm old. And I still miss my best friend. He didn't deserve what happened to him. He was the sweetest, kindest boy, and he simply wanted to be liked. But now he's dead, and I've never spoken up about exactly how he was killed. I have no idea what became of Jake and Jonah after they left that school, and I've never made any attempt to find out. I hope they made something of their lives and that Jonah hasn't wasted the opportunity I gave him by staying quiet, so that I can at least believe Clarky would approve of my decision. I attended a charter school in Minnesota in the early 90s, back when that type of school was really popping off. A new one had opened the year before I was due to start school, and I guess it appealed to my parents. In my memory, the school was in a converted mansion, but I was about 5, so who knows how accurate my memory of this place is. I remember it being a damp and musty place with a small number of students. Us little kids were on the first floor, then the classrooms for older kids were on the next floor up, then the teachers' rooms above that, and an attic. As you move through the school system, you move from classrooms deeper into the building, I guess. I didn't stay at that school long enough to have classes on the second floor, so I don't remember what they were like. I do remember being in the attic once or twice, though, maybe one Christmas, and I can't remember why, but thinking about it makes me feel weird and unsettled. I hate it when someone says, "Now for a bit of backstory," but you need to know a little bit about the family that ran the school. There was our principal, Mrs. Howe, and she ran the school. If you've ever seen the old British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, that's exactly what Mrs. Howe looked like. She could have been her twin, honestly. Then there was her husband, Mr. Howe, and looking back, I had no idea what he did at the school. He was like some kind of businessman. He'd occasionally teach us children's subjects, but I don't think he was actually a teacher by profession. He was a weird guy. I remember him being ridiculously tall and lanky, thinning hair and wet, watery eyes. He'd mumble and sort of stutter, but if he got mad at you, then he got really mad. His face would go red, and his eyes bulged when he yelled. We were all a bit afraid of him, but also kind of disgusted, I guess. He just had this air of being gross for some unknown reasons. Mrs. Howe, I remember being pretty stern, and then occasionally really nice out of the blue, especially to me. She gave me a Christmas present once, and I never understood why at the time. None of the other kids at the school got a Christmas present from the principal. The Howes had 3 kids, and one of them, Wally we'll call him, was in the same class as me, and I guess these days you'll call him special needs. He was really clumsy, a little gangly kid who was happy all of the time, except when he'd inevitably hurt himself in some accident or another. Then he'd howl and bawl for a hot minute, and you always knew that he was entering the classroom because he'd somehow managed to crash through desks and chairs and send everything flying. Then there was the middle child, who I guess must have been a high schooler. She was only around occasionally, after classes and during weekend events, and anything where I guess her parents dragged her along. She was a pretty standard 90s goth-looking girl, and as a little kid I knew nothing about her. She was just kind of there. Then there was the oldest son, Dom. He was in his early 20s and was back from college after graduating around that time. We didn't think anything of it as kids, but he was hanging around that school all the damn time. Just the principal's adult son, lurking around an elementary school. He was a normal guy, although also extremely tall. And almost every memory I have of the 2 years that I spent at that school, he was around. Sports day, Christmas festival, bake sale, even during the school weeks. I don't know if I'm remembering his looming presence more than it actually was, but you can see how this is weird already, right? They were a weird family, but of course, a little kid doesn't really pick up on things like that or consider how odd it is to have both a weird husband and a weird adult son just hanging around your school all the time. Eventually I did find it weird though, and then eventually terrifying. This school also had a pool. The school was in the countryside just past suburbia, so there was a lot of trees around the outskirts of the grounds. The pool was an outdoor pool built in a forest canopy, just down a path from the play areas where we had recess, and to the right of the school playing field. That first summer at the school, we didn't use the swimming pool at all, and I remember all us kids being super disappointed after we'd been so excited to see it when we originally started. The second year, though, it was a really hot summer beginning in early May, and they hired people to come and clean the pool and give it an overhaul. It was a huge deal. Everyone was excited about the pool finally getting to be used again. It had become a bit taboo. We'd get yelled at massively if we went to the pool area when we weren't supposed to, which I guess is fair enough because it would have been dangerous if anyone fell into the uncovered pool. It was always uncovered back when we didn't use it and filled with leaves, tree branches, insects, and very foul, disgusting water. So instead of buying a cover or hiring a pool cleaner, they just instilled this fear of God into us not to go near it. But then they cleaned it, got an actual cover, and we could go near it again. We had swimming lessons overseen by our various teachers, and there was a recreational swimming club held on Thursdays where we could just play in the pool with floaties and toys. The dressing rooms for the pool were two small shacks under the tree line, boys and girls. They were old buildings. I had no idea what the school was before it was a school, but the changing rooms felt like they came from that time. Despite being a fairly expensive charter school, they didn't spend much money on upkeep as far as I can remember, and I guess cleaning the pool exhausted their pool budget because the changing rooms were absolutely foul. You had to be really careful not to sit on or brush against the benches because they were wooden and splintery. There were spiders and other insects all over the place, and it was just icky and gross, and oftentimes, if we had swimming, we'd just wear our swimsuits to school that day under our clothes, so it was just at least quicker to change and get into the pool. We also had a rule that we weren't allowed to lock any doors at that school ever. This was because one kid had gotten themselves locked in a bathroom stall for the entire lunch break and had a panic attack. So instead of fixing the locks and improving things, we were just told to not lock any doors so we wouldn't get stuck anywhere. We didn't even consider locking the dressing rooms or anything because of this, even though they had old bolt-type locks. This is why Dom, the weird adult son that I mentioned earlier, was able to just stroll into the dressing rooms. I don't know why he, of all people, had been tasked with making sure that the kids were changed and ready for swimming. He would sometimes oversee us in the pool, but again, he was just the principal's adult son, not really a teacher. For sure, not something they'd get away with these days, at least I hope not, but in the early 90s at a charter school, absolutely, especially when you know certain things about this school that we'll eventually find out here. Now anyway, it wasn't at all unusual for Dom to burst in on kids changing. He even made a joke of it. He'd burst in and yell boo, and of course we'd all laugh at this. It was just a boy bursting in on other boys. He didn't do it to the girls. And I remember even back then I didn't like it at all, but at the age, I had my own issues going on and really struggled to vocalize discomfort or fear. This one particular day, we were coming up to the summer break and it was blistering hot out, a very sweaty day, and I was dragging my heels. The rest of my friends had already changed and were in the pool, and I was taking my time getting into my swim trunks. I hadn't remembered to wear them from home, so I was fully halfway through changing when the door creaked open. "Boo!" Dom said. His voice was quieter than usual. I'm sure he knew I was alone in there, but I didn't think that at the time, of course. My heart was immediately pounding. I had only been alone with Dom once before, in the attic that previous Christmas, and he made me super uncomfortable and scared then, so he made me feel the same way now. "Hurry it up, Ben," he told me. "Everyone's out there playing already." I expected him to leave, but he didn't. The door had swung shut behind him, and he just stood there watching me with his arms folded. He was holding my swim trunks over the front of myself, and the only way that I could put them on was by doing it in front of Dom. This made me feel a coldness deep down inside my belly that I'd never really felt before. I really didn't want to do this in front of him, but he was an adult and the principal's son, and I didn't want to get in trouble by saying anything either. Instead, I compromised and turned my back to him, quickly slipping the trunks up my legs. "Boo!" Dom grabbed my shoulders. I hadn't heard him come up behind me, and in the split second it took me to realize what had happened, imagining him sneaking up on me while I was changing, I felt awful in a way that I cannot describe. I whirled around and fell backwards against the bench, which was rough and splintery and cut into my bare legs. And immediately I started crying because I was a little kid and I was scared and hurt. And Dom's face got angry. "Hey, don't cry," he scolded. "I was just playing a trick on you. Don't be a little baby." He reached forward and grabbed my arm, hard, and it hurt. He pulled me to my feet and around him. Again, it really hurt. I wasn't used to physical punishment, and I was worried that he was going to spank me or something. I don't know if I intentionally shoved him or he tripped or what. Now officially, he tripped, but of course he would say that because he wouldn't want to explain what he'd been doing to me in the first place. He stumbled backwards slightly and knocked against the flimsy wall of the dressing room. Suddenly I heard a sound that I wasn't expecting at all. A strange thwomp sound and then wild, strong buzzing. Something had been knocked clear from the rafters of the changing room. It was a frickin' wasp's nest. An angry, disturbed wasp nest getting smacked to the floor in the tiny confines of the changing room, and pretty much immediately a huge cloud of wasps swarmed out of the remnants of that paper hive. Dom let out this sort of strangled cry as they began to buzz towards him angrily. Then he ran forward and fully shoved me out of the way, so I fell back and hit the wall on the other side. It took him a moment to open the door, and again, I can't say for sure because it was all kinds of chaos with the whole wasp attack scenario, but I am certain that he had to unlock the door to get out, which means that he'd locked it behind him when he came in. Whether this was a detail I've added in my mind later or not, I don't know, but I don't think so. Dom ran out, screaming like a high-pitched weirdo, and the cloud of wasps followed him. I was already crying, but my eyes welled with fresh tears as I felt a sting on my right shoulder. And that's all, though. Just a singular sting, and when I went outside, it was still chaos. Teachers were batting towels at wasps while others ushered the kids out of the pool. Dom himself was swatting and flapping at the wasp with his bare hands, still shrieking over and over. I just ran to where my friends were going and got out of there. It took a while for the wasps to disperse and for some teacher to recover our clothes, so we were all sitting around on the playing fields in our swimsuits. Nothing really happened immediately after all of this. We didn't see Dom at the school again. I heard that he'd suffered from a lot of wasp stings. Good, the creeper. And when that school year ended, I was told during that summer that I'd be changing to a different school next semester. It was never explained why, but I didn't really need to ask. Even at that age, I knew Dom had tried to do a really bad thing, and that this was a good reason for me to leave that school. I didn't really mind leaving my friends. I had friends who already went to the new school as well, so it'd be fun. And I only found out much later that it was a lot weirder and creepier than I knew. The principal and her husband were basically scammers, running a school and getting charter funding as well as tuition fees, while spending the absolute bare minimum on upkeep, curriculum, and student safety. So some real tax-dodgy things there. Eventually, Mr. Howe was pursued by the law for some kind of fraud or embezzlement. A wild story in itself, but one I can't really share because the details are so uniquely weird that it'd be too easy to work out who these people were. Not that I want to protect them, just myself. Maybe I'm being overly cautious. They were bad people after all, but the principal is still out there, and who knows, maybe there's a way that she could be litigious. Dawn isn't still out there, though, at least not now. My mom found out via the local paper, a few years after the embezzlement things, that Dom had been sent to prison for completely unrelated crimes. Yeah. Sadly, in his 40s, he'd gotten into a relationship with a woman who had 2 kids and abused both of them. I don't know the details of the abuse, and I don't want to know. It chills me enough knowing the lucky escape that I had, and I try not to fixate on the fact that I'm certain the changing room door was locked when he tried to leave. Maybe I would have been fine. But that doesn't stop me from thanking God for those wasps, and hopefully it really hurt when they stung that predator, because he absolutely deserved that, and far, far worse. When this happened, it was late summer, and at the time I was female, 21 years old, finishing up college before med school. The only important detail really is knowing that we were a group of 4 girls, all around 20 to 21, having a small pool party in a raised backyard pool at our shared house. It was maybe around 10, possibly a bit earlier. We'd been drinking on and off for about an hour or two, and spirits were high. We were having fun, we were relaxed, and we were chilled out, and it was the perfect evening. The sun was beginning to set over the forest on the outskirts of our suburban property, and the mouth-watering smell of the Petersons' barbecue was making me hungry. And it seemed like they'd had the same idea as us, to have a backyard party, and sometimes, when our music paused, you could hear theirs in the background. There had been a bunch of kids at the Petersons' party earlier, but now the raucous noise of children playing had died down and everything was chill. The girls and I were just kicking back, listening to, well, whatever was popular with us back then, I guess, and enjoying a bit of downtime from the last grueling year of studying, work, and personal drama. We were drinking cocktails, the glasses sitting on the side of the outdoor above-ground pool, just having a good time. We were doing absolutely nothing to invite or deserve what came next. The back gate to our property opened. This wasn't particularly alarming in and of itself. There was 5 of us total living in that house, and Janet B. was out at work and expected home soon. It could also have been Claire or Dana's boyfriends, or any number of people really. Our house was gathering central back then, and it was normal for trusted people to let themselves in the back gate instead of coming in the front door, especially if they could hear us partying in the yard. I couldn't see the gate myself from the pool, I had my back to it, but I could tell from Kelly and Claire's reactions that whoever had entered through the back gate shouldn't have been there. Who the hell are they? Kelly asked. I turned around in the pool. 3 guys strolled into the yard. They looked around college age and sauntered over with confidence that I'd seen in a million frat dudes. I didn't recognize any of them, but maybe one of the girls did, and alarm bells weren't ringing just yet. Can we help you guys? Dana asked. A quick look at Claire and Kelly told me that they didn't know the boys either. The lead frat guy gave this big, stupid grin, and even then, without any real evidence, I had a strong feeling that we might be in trouble. He looked almost wolfish and predatory, and I didn't like it. We were just in the area, thought we'd swing by, he said, or something like that. Kelly, always the smartass, told him that he should swing back on out the way he came, and that made him laugh. No, seriously, I said. Are you guys looking for Janet? They shot a look at each other. Janet? Sure, the bigger guy in the back said. They introduced themselves, probably with made-up names, I thought later, and I don't remember what they said their names were, so I'll always just call them Chad, Brad, and Vlad when I tell this story. Might as well get some fun out of an otherwise horrible incident. Well, Janet's at work, I told them. I'm not sure when she'll be back. Chad at the front beamed again, saying, Well, that's fine. We'll wait. Why are you looking for Janet? Claire asked. Oh, you know, she owes us, Brad said. Janet? Really? Janet was the most sensible of all of us. She was the least likely to owe anyone money, and the most likely to be out at work while the rest of us had a pool party. I guess I grilled them on it because Chad came up to the pool edge. Yeah, she owes us. But any of you can pay up on her behalf if you're so inclined, he said. Yeah, no thanks, I thought. So to explain our outdoor pool, it was one of those above-ground units that could be assembled, disassembled, and moved, rather than a pool built into the ground. It was sort of halfway between a pool and a hot tub, I guess. Like a hot tub, but bigger and without jets or heating. You know the type of old pool I mean. Now getting in and out required a ladder, a separate piece that clipped over the side of the pool. One side of the ladder went vertically down into the pool and the other angled outward like a playground slide. Without the ladder, it was technically possible to get out by dragging yourself over the side and falling onto the grass, but it was awkward as hell and extremely undignified. Fine when you were alone, but not in front of these strange guys. And that's why it was so alarming when almost immediately, Vlad silently lifted the ladder up and away from the pool. Hey, don't be a dick, Kelly said, swimming over to that side. I sighed and rolled my eyes. I still wasn't actually scared yet. The boys had been so bold coming into the yard, I was certain that they had to be connected to one of us. Could it really be sweet, square Janet? Hey, just making sure you stay where we can keep an eye on you, Chad said. His voice seemed to be filled with cruel teasing. Yeah, we don't want you to attack us, Brad added. That's not what I meant, dumbass, Chad snapped, like he was mad that Brad had chimed in on his oh-so-hilarious joke. All 3 of them were staring us up and down, their eyes traveling across our bodies. We were all in hot bikinis, and the sun had almost fully set, but the garden was lit up brightly by our outdoor lighting. I strained to hear whether the Petersons were still in their yard, and I thought so, and that felt reassuring. If anything too bad started to happen, I could yell out to them pretty easily. The boys talked to us for a few minutes about some nonsense that I don't remember. All the while, the 3 of them circled the pool like coyotes, and it felt like they'd rehearsed this. They could tell that they were unnerving us, that we were vulnerable, and I know that they were enjoying it. Then Chad started messing around trying to dunk Claire. If Janet was the sensible one, Claire was the shy one, the least likely to enjoy that kind of horseplay. Plus, she had a boyfriend that she'd been going steady with for a long time. F off, Claire yelled. Don't touch me. Hey, chill out, babe. I'm just having fun, Chad said, acting all hurt. Yeah, I think it's time for you guys to leave, Dana said, beginning to pull herself over the side of the pool. In the blink of an eye, the almost silent Vlad darted over and shoved her quite forcefully back into the pool. And that's when I knew that we were actually in potentially some danger. Hey, don't shove her, I yelled, hoping the Petersons could hear us at this point. Chad's face suddenly turned serious. I suggest you bitches shut up. Start talking, he said. Talking about what? I asked. I looked at my friends and realized that Kelly, normally the loudest, most outspoken, most confident one of us, had been strangely quiet through most of this. "Kelly, do you know these guys?" I asked, and she shook her head. "No, I don't know them, but..." "Ah, so it's you," Chad said, pacing over to Kelly. The three of us instinctively closed in around her, only the pool walls between us and those guys. "What's you?" Dana asked. "She's the one seeing our good friend Pete," Chad said. Kelly had in fact been seeing a new guy recently, Pete. Dana and Janet didn't like him so much, but I did. He was a bit of a stoner, didn't take things too seriously. Not long-term material for Kelly, or so I thought. He seemed fun enough for a fling. "You're friends of Pete?" Kelly asked, and she seemed relieved. "Well, he wishes," Chad said. "Pete owes us a lot of money, and we thought the other girl was his piece, but if it's you, maybe you can pay the debt." "How much?" Kelly asked, and she looked sick. I was still glancing towards the Petersons' yard. "Don't even think about it," Brad growled and grabbed my shoulder. At the same time, Chad grabbed Kelly and Vlad grabbed Dana. Claire shrieked and backed up to the center of the pool. "Stay right there," Chad told her. Then, as if to demonstrate why, the three boys dunked us all underwater and held us there. It wasn't hard to slip out of their grasps. We weren't in danger of drowning, but it still hurt, and it was still terrible. We joined Claire in the center of the pool, and that's when things started to get very unpleasant. "If any of you scream or try to get out or do anything, then I promise you, we will hurt you really, really badly," Chad said. He pulls out a switchblade from his pocket. Just a small thing, but I could tell in the dim light that it was incredibly sharp. I also knew exactly how much damage 3 grown men could do to 4 bikini-clad women before anyone could get there. "Please just leave us alone," Dana said. "Pete isn't even here. He's not even stopping by tonight." "Well, that just sucks for you girls then," Chad said. "We want our money. We need it. And this one here's Pete's girl, so..." "How much does he owe? Maybe we can pay you," I asked. Chad started to eye me up. "He owes us $20. I kept eye contact with him, and then he burst out laughing. Brad joined in, and their cackles started to grate on me. "No, he owes us some serious moolah, babe," Chad said. $5,000. Oh, God. None of us had anywhere near $5,000 lying around the house, even if we wanted to hand it over to these weirdos. "What the hell does Pete owe $5,000 for?" Kelly demanded. Chad made an exaggerated sniffing sound and rubbed his nose. "Oh, this and that." Pete usually had a stash of harder stuff that I was used to. He often had small baggies of coke, MDMA, and things like that. And Kelly had met him when she was trying to score some weed, so it wasn't too far-fetched to imagine that he dealt coke and owed these guys. I always assumed people like Pete got their drugs from more cartel-like types, but I was wrong. I've since realized that dealers exist at every level in all walks of life. "Yeah, so either you pay us yourself, or you get Pete over here to settle his debt. Or maybe you girls could pay us back some other way." Chad chuckled. Brad clearly liked this idea, and he stared at me in particular, which I really didn't appreciate. "Ew, no thanks," I remember saying. And I was considering what to do in that moment. We could rush them, or rush for the back gate, but we'd have to flop out of that pool first. If all of us did it, maybe one of us could get away, but what would those guys do to the rest in the meantime? And how could I communicate a plan without them hearing? Claire had drifted to the other side of the pool, maybe just to get some distance, and we were so focused on Chad and Brad we didn't notice Vlad had circled around. When Claire got close enough, he grabbed her by the hair. She let out a small yell before his hand clamped over her mouth. "Well, someone better make a decision soon, or we're really gonna hurt this one," Chad said. Claire's eyes were starting to fill with tears, and she looked genuinely terrified, and my heart broke for her. I can go call Pete," I remember Kelly saying. And this was before smartphones. It was the era of brick-like Nokias, and we all had cell phones, but we weren't glued to them, and we didn't bring them near water, so none of us had one at the pool. The only way Kelly could call Pete was by going inside. She told the boys that, and Chad considered it. Fine, I'll go with you, he said. Brad, Vlad, you watch these other lovely young ladies. He didn't say lovely young ladies, he said a nastier slur that I'm not going to repeat. Kelly, don't, I said. I'll call Pete and it'll be fine, she said, but her face said otherwise. Chad helped Kelly over the side of the pool and guided her to the back door, gripping her arm. She opened the sliding glass door, and I could see everything from the middle of the pool. I saw a flash of movement and heard a loud, shattering crash. Kelly had grabbed the lamp off that table just inside the door and smashed it right into Chad's face. He let out a huge, bellowing scream and staggered back, falling over one of the patio chairs, and blood was beginning to pour down his face. Thank God, I thought. But Kelly wasn't done. She came running back into the yard, screaming and calling for help at the top of her lungs, so loud the neighbors had at that point heard. Quickly, the rest of us joined in. Kelly charged at Brad, swinging something that she'd grabbed from inside. It was one of the golf clubs Dana's boyfriend, Chris, always left lying around. And Chris never got scolded for leaving these clubs out again after this. Kelly swung the club down hard, cracking Brad's forearm as he tried to defend himself. Chad was already bolting for that gate, and I swear I saw a shard of lamp sticking from his cheek. He ripped the gate open and ran, and Brad was stumbling out after him. It felt like only seconds later that Mr. Peterson and a couple of other adult men rushed in. They're getting away, Kelly screamed, but the men were more focused on checking in on us. They really had no idea what was going on. Vlad, for some reason, had kind of just stuck around and was sort of standing there, dumbfounded. He's one of them, I told Mr. Peterson. And one of his friends, who turned out to be some off-duty cop, grabbed this Vlad character and pinned him to the ground, and basically sat on him like a pro wrestler. And it was a pretty hardcore ending to a terrifying, horrible experience. We called the cops and told them everything. They spoke to Pete, who denied owing these guys anything, but he was able to ID them. They were juniors at our college, too. Trying to get them charged for what they did was rough, since the only ones injured were Chad and Brad. We were going to push for assault charges, but in the end, we settled out of court with their families. Their parents were super embarrassed by their dumbass sons. It wasn't a great payday, and no, it didn't feel worth it. I wish we would have done more to punish them, but at least the drug stuff wasn't something their families could buy their way out of completely. They avoided jail because, of course, money always talks, but they still got hit with some real consequences. Expelled, probation, all kinds of things, and they knew better than to ever come near any of us again. Chad also had a wicked scar from that lamp, I remember hearing. Cooler than he deserved, honestly, but I doubt he thought so. You'd think Kelly would break up with Pete after all of that, but no. I'm not kidding when I say they eventually got married and had a kid, and are still together to this day. We stayed in that house until our lease ended and then eventually moved out. Kelly and I stayed close, but the rest of the girls, including Janet, who hadn't been there that night, eventually drifted away. Kelly and I are still friends, and both she and Peter gave me permission to share this story, and you'll be glad to know that we've all settled down. Pete's a great dad, and both he and Kelly are nurses now. As for me, I'll keep that to myself. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm not: a swimmer.